Hare Krishna, we are going to read Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta Volume 1, a biography of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta, College, Marriage, and Gandhi's Movement. Unfortunately, I've been reading, so I'll continue from page 38. Preparation that had formerly been monopolized by European firms. He agreed to accept Abe as a department manager at his laboratory. Although Abe knew little of the pharmaceutical industry or of management, he felt confident that by reading a few related books, he could learn what he needed to know. But when this new young man was suddenly given the post of department manager, several workers became dissatisfied. Some of them were elderly and had been 40 years with the firm. They voiced their dissatisfaction amongst themselves and finally confronted Dr. Bose. Why had this young man been put in charge? Dr. Bose replied, "Oh, for that position, I needed someone I could trust, like my own son. He's singing checks for 40,000. He's signing checks for 40,000 rupees. Beg your pardon. I could only entrust the personal handling of my accounts in that department to him. His father and I are very close, and this young man is known to me practically as my son." Guru Mohan felt he had done his best. His prayer was that the principles of pure Vaishnavism he had taught his son would stay with him and guide him throughout his life. Gandhi and the cause of Swaraj had disrupted Abe's college career, and Abe was still inclined towards nationalism, but not so much for a political motive as for a spiritual vision. So Goa Mohan was content. He knew the marriage arrangement was not pleasing to Abe, but Abe had accepted his explanation that detachment from wife and family affairs would be good for spiritual advancement. And Abe was showing an inherent disinterest in materialistic affairs. This also did not displease Gora Mohan, to whom business had always been subservient to his worship of Lord Krishna. He had expected this. Now Abe had a promising job and would be making the best of his marriage. Guru Mohan had done what he could, and he depended on Krishna for the ultimate result. Gandhi, bolstered by his emergence as a leader among the Congress Party, now openly attacked the empire's exploitative cloth trade with India. England was purchasing raw cotton from India at the lowest prices, manufacturing it into cloth in the Lancashire mills in England, and then selling the monopolized cloth at high prices to the Indian millions. Gandhi's propaganda was that India should return to making her own cloth, using simple spinning wheels and handle looms, thus completely boycotting the British made cloth and attacking an economic base of Britain's power over India. Traveling by train throughout the country, Gandhi repeatedly appealed to his countrymen to reject all foreign cloth and wear only the simple coarse khadi produced from India's own cottage industry. Before the British rule, India had spun and woven her own cloth. Gandhi argued that by breaking the cottage industries, the British were sinking the Indian masses into semi-starvation and lifelessness. To set the example, Gandhi himself worked daily at a primitive spinning wheel and wore only a simple, coarse lion cloth and shawl. He would hold meetings and ask people to come forth and reject their imported cloth. On the spot, people would throw down heaps of cloth, and he would set it ablaze. Gandhi's wife complained that the khadi was too thick and not convenient to wear while cooking. She asked if while cooking she could wear the light, British-made cloth. Yes, you are free to cook with your meal cloth on. Gandhi had hold her, but I must exercise a similar freedom by not taking the meal so prepared. The cost of cottage industry appealed to Abe. He too was not enamored with the modern industrial advances the British had introduced in India. Not only was simple living good for the long-term national economy of hundreds of millions of Indians, as Gandhi was emphasizing, but to Abe it was also the way of life most conducive to spiritual culture. Abe put aside his mill-manufactured cloth and took to wearing khadi. Now his dress revealed him to whomever he met, British and Indian alike. He was a nationalist, a sympathizer of revolution. To wear khadi in India in the early 1920s was not a mere clothing fad. It was a political statement. It meant he was a Gandhian. Chapter 3. A very nice, saintly person. There has not been, there will not be, such benefactors of the highest merit as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees have been. The offer of other benefit is only a deception. It is rather a great harm, whereas the benefit done by him and his followers is the truest and greatest eternal benefit. This benefit is not for one particular country, causing mischief to another, but it benefits the whole universe. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Abe's friend Narendrana Maulik was insistent. He wanted Abe to see a sadhu from Mayapur. Naren and some of his friends had already met the sadhu at his nearby ashram on Ultandanga Junction Road, and now they wanted Abe's opinion. Everyone within their circle of friends considered Abe the leader, so if Naren could tell the others that Abe also had a high regard for the sadhu, then that would confirm their own estimations. Abe was reluctant. To go, but Naren pressed him. They stood talking amidst the passerbys on the crowded evening street as the traffic of horse-drawn hackneys, ox carts, and occasional auto taxis and motor buses moved noisily on the road. Naren put his hand firmly around his friend's arm, trying to drag him forward, while Abe smiled about stubbornly pulled the other way. While Abe smiled but stubbornly pulled the other way. Naren argued that since they were only a few blocks away, they should at least pay a short visit. Abe laughed and asked to be excused. People could see that the two young men were friends, but it was a curious sight. The handsome young man dressed in white khadi kurta and dhoti being pulled along by his friend. Narayan explained that the sadhu Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was a Vaishnava and a great devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One of his disciples, a sannyasi, had visited the Mulik house and had invited them to meet Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. A few of the Muliks had gone to see him and had been very much impressed. But Abe remained skeptical. "Oh no, I know all these sadhus," he said. "I'm not going." Abe had seen many sadhus in his childhood. Every day his father had entertained at least 3 or 4 in his home. Some of them were no more than beggars, and some even smoked ganja. Go Mohan had been very liberal in allowing anyone who wore the saffron robes of a sannyasi to come. But did it mean that though a man was no more than a beggar or ganja smoker, he had to be considered saintly just because he dressed as a sannyasi or was collecting funds in the name of building a monastery or could influence people with his speech? No, by and large, they were a disappointing lot. Abe had even seen a man in his neighborhood who was a beggar by occupation. In the morning, when others dressed in their work clothes and went to their jobs, this man would put on saffron cloth and go out to beg. In this way, earn his livelihood. But was it fitting that such a so-called sadhu be paid a respectful visit as if he were a guru? Naren argued that he felt that this particular sadhu was a very learned scholar and that Abe should at least meet him and judge for himself. Abe wished that Naren would not behave this way, but finally he could no longer refuse his friend. Together they walked past the Parsnath Jain temple to Ultadanga with the sign Bhaktivinoda Ashana, announcing it to be the quarters of the Gaudiya Math. When they inquired at the door, a young man recognized Mr. Mulik. Naren had Mr. Mulik. Naren had previously given a donation and immediately escorted them up to the roof of the second floor and into the presence of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who was sitting and enjoying the early evening atmosphere with a few disciples and guests. Sitting with his back very straight, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati appeared tall. He was slender, his arms were long, and his complexion was fair and golden. He wore round bifocals with simple frames. His nose was sharp, his forehead broad, and his expression was very scholarly, yet not at all timid. The vertical markings of a Vaishnava tilak on his forehead were familiar to Abe, as were the simple sannyas robes that draped over his right shoulder, leaving the other shoulder and half his chest bare. The word tulasi neck beads and the clay Vaishnava markings of tilak were visible at his throat, shoulder, and upper arms. The clean white Brahmanical thread was looped around his neck and draped across his chest. Abe and Naren, having both been raised in Vaishnava families, immediately offered prostrated obeisances at the side of the revered sannyasi, while the two young men were still rising and preparing to sit. Before any preliminary formalities of conversation had begun, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati immediately said to them, "You are educated young men. Why don't you preach Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message throughout the whole world?" Abe could hardly believe what he had just heard. They had not even exchanged views, yet this sadhu was telling them what they should do. Sitting face to face with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Abe was gathering his words and trying to gain a comprehensible impression, but this person had already told them to become preachers and go all over the world. Abe was immediately impressed, but he wasn't going to drop his intelligent skepticism. After all, there were assumptions in what the sadhu had said. Abe had already announced himself by his dress to be a follower of Gandhi, and he felt the impulse to raise an argument. Yet as he continued to listen to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta speak, he also began to feel won over by the sadhu's strength of conviction. He could sense that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta didn't care for anything but Lord Chaitanya, and that this was what made him great. This was why followers had gathered around him, and why Abe himself felt drawn, inspired, and humbled, and wanted to hear more. But he felt obliged to make an argument to test the truth. Drawn irresistibly into discussion, Abe spoke up in answer to the words Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had to. Abe spoke up in answer to the words Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had so tersely spoken in the first second of their meeting. "Who will hear your Chaitanya's message?" Abe queried. "We are a dependent country. First, India must become independent. How can we spread India's culture if we are under British rule?" Abe had not asked heartily, just to be provocative, yet his question was clearly a challenge. If he were to take this sadhu's remark to them as a serious one, and there was nothing in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's demeanor to indicate that he had not been serious, Abe felt compelled to question how he could propose such a thing while India was still dependent. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta replied in a quiet, deep voice that Krishna consciousness didn't have to wait for a change in India politics. Now was it dependent on who ruled. Krishna consciousness was so important, so exclusively important, that he could not wait. Abe was struck by his boldness. How could he say such a thing? The whole world of India beyond this little Ultandanga rooftop was in turmoil and seemed to support what Abe had said. Many famous leaders of Bengal, many saints, even Gandhi himself, men who were educated and spiritually minded, all might very well have asked this same question, challenging this sadhu's relevancy. And yet he was dismissing everything and everyone as if they were of no consequence. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta continued, whether one power or another ruled was a temporary situation, but the eternal reality is Krishna consciousness, and the real self is the spirit soul. No man-made political system, therefore, could actually help humanity. This was the Vedic of the Vedic scripture and the line of spiritual masters. Although everyone is an eternal servant of God, when one takes himself to be the temporary body and regards the nation of his birth as worshipable, he comes under illusion. The leaders and the followers of the world's political movements, including the movement of Swaraj, were simply cultivating this illusion. Real welfare work, whether individual, social, or political, should help prepare a person for his next life and help him re-establish his eternal relationship with the Supreme. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had articulated these ideas many times before in his writings. There has not been, there will not be such benefactors of the highest merit as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees have been. The offer of other benefit is only a deception. It is rather a great harm, whilst the benefit done by him and his followers is the truest and greatest eternal benefit. This benefit is not for one particular country causing mischief to another, but it benefits the whole universe. The kindness that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has shown to jivas absolves them eternally from all wants, from all inconveniences, and from all the distresses. That kindness does not produce any evil, and the jivas who have it will not be the victims of the evils of the world. As Abe listened attentively to the arguments of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he recalled a Bengali poet who had written that even less advanced civilizations like China and Japan were independent, and yet India labored under political oppression. Abe knew well the philosophy of nationalism, which stressed that Indian independence had to come first. An oppressed people was a reality. The British slaughter of innocent citizens was a reality, and independence would benefit people. Spiritual life was a luxury that could be afforded only after independence. In the present times, the cause of national liberation from the British was the only relevant spiritual movement. The people's cause was in itself God. Yes, because Abe had been raised a Vaishnava, he appreciated what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was saying. Abe had already concluded that this was certainly not just another questionable sadhu, and he perceived the truth in what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said. This sadhu wasn't concocting his own philosophy, and he wasn't simply proud or belligerent. Even though he spoke in a way that kicked out practically every other philosophy, he was speaking the eternal teachings of the Vedic literature and the sages, and Abe loved to hear it. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, speaking sometimes in English and sometimes in Bengali, and sometimes quoting the Sanskrit verses of the Bhagavad Gita, spoke of Sri Krishna as the highest Vedic authority. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna had declared that a person should give up whatever duty he considers religious and surrender unto him. The personality of Godhead, Savada Mam Parityagya Mam Ekam Saranam Vraja, and the Srimad Bhagavatam confirmed the same thing. The Mahaprojita Kaitavo Tre Paramo Nimatsaranam Satam. All other forms of religion are impure and should be thrown out, and only Bhagavatam Dharma, performing one's duties to please the Supreme Lord, should remain. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's presentation was too cogent that anyone who accepted the Shastras will have to accept his conclusion. The people were now faithless, said Bhaktisiddhanta, and therefore they no longer believed that devotional service could remove all anomalies, even on the political scene. He went on to criticize anyone who was ignorant of the soul and yet claimed to be a leader. He even cited names of contemporary leaders and pointed out their failures and he emphasized the urgent need to render the highest good of humanity by educating people about the eternal soul and the soul's relation to Krishna and devotional service. Abe had never forgotten the worship of Lord Krishna or his teachings in Bhagavad Gita, and his family had always worshipped Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whose mission Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was espousing. As these Gaudiya Math people worshipped Krishna, he also had worshipped Krishna throughout his life and had never forgotten Krishna. But now he was astonished to hear the Vaishnava philosophy presented so masterfully. Despite his involvement in college, marriage, the national movement, and other affairs, he had never forgotten Krishna. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was now stirring up within him his original Krishna consciousness. And by the words of this spiritual master only, not only was he remembering Krishna, but he felt his Krishna consciousness being enhanced 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. What had been unspoken in Abe's boyhood, what had been vague in Jagannath Puri, what he had been distracted from a college, what he had been protected in by his father, now surged forth within Abe in responsive feelings, and he wanted to keep it. He felt himself defeated, but he liked it. He suddenly realized that he had never before been defeated, but this defeat was not a loss, it was an immense gain. Srila Prabhupada, I was from a Vaishnava family, so I could appreciate what he was preaching. Of course, he was speaking to everyone, but he found something in me, and I was convinced about his argument and mode of presentation. I was so much struck with wonder. I could understand. Here is the proper person who can give a real religious idea. It was late. Abe and Narayan had been talking with him for more than 2 hours. One of the brahmacharis gave them each a bit of prasadam in their open palms, and they rose gratefully and took their leave. They walked down the stairs and onto the street. The night was dark. Here and there a light was burning, and there were some open shops. Abe pondered in great satisfaction what he had just heard. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's explanation of the independence movement was a temporary, incomplete cause had made a deep impression on him. He felt himself less a nationalist and more a follower of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He also thought that it would have been better if he were not married. This great personality was asking him to preach. He could have immediately joined, but he was married, and to leave his family would be an injustice. Walking away from the ashram, Narayan turned to his friend. So Abe, what was your impression? What do you think of him? He's wonderful, replied Abe. The message of Lord Chaitanya is the hands of a very expert person. Srila Prabhupada, I accepted him as my spiritual master immediately, not officially, but in my heart. I was thinking that I had met a very nice, saintly person. After his first meeting with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Abe began to associate more with the Gaudiya Math devotees. They gave him books and told him the history of their spiritual master. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was one of the 10 children born to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, a great Vaishnava teacher in the disciplic line from Lord Chaitanya himself. Before the time of Bhaktivinoda, the teachings of Lord Chaitanya had been obscured by teachers and sects falsely claiming to be followers of Lord Chaitanya, but deviating in various drastic ways from his pure teachings. The good reputation of Vaishnavism had been compromised. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, however, through his prolific writings and through his social position as a high government officer, re-established the respectability of Vaishnava. He preached that the teachings of Lord Chaitanya were the highest form of theism and were intended not for a particular sect or religion or nation, but for all the people of the world. He prophesied that Lord Chaitanya's teachings will go worldwide, and he yearned for it. The religion preached by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is universal and not exclusive. The principle of Kirtan as the future church of the world invites all classes of men without distinctions of caste or slant to the highest cultivation of the spirit. This church, it appears, will extend all over the world and take the place of all sectarian churches which exclude outsiders from the precincts of the mosque, church, or temple. Lord Chaitanya did not advance himself to liberate only a few men of India. Rather, his main objective was to emancipate all living entities of all countries throughout the entire universe and preach the eternal religion. Lord Chaitanya says in Chaitanya Bhagavat, "In every town, country, and village, my name will be sung." There is no doubt that this unquestionable order will come to pass. Although there is still no pure society of Vaishnava to be had, yet Lord Chaitanya's prophetic words will in a few days come true. I'm sure. Why not? Nothing is absolutely pure in the beginning. From imperfection, purity will come about. Oh, for that day when the fortunate English, French, Russian, German, American people take up banners, mridangas, and katas and raise kirtan through their streets and towns. When will that day come? As a prominent magistrate, Bhaktivinoda Thakura was a responsible government officer. He served also as superintendent of the temple of Lord Jagannath and was the father of 10 children. Yet in spite of these responsibilities, he served the cause of Krishna with prodigious energy. After coming home from his office in the evening, taking his meals and going to bed, he would sleep from 8 until midnight and then get up and write until morning. He wrote more than 100 books during his life, many of them in English. One of his important contributions with the cooperation of Jagannath Das Babaji and Gorakishora Das Babaji was to locate the exact birthplace of Lord Chaitanya in Mayapur, about 60 miles north of Calcutta. While working to reform Gaudiya Vaishnavism in India, he prayed to Lord Chaitanya, "Your teachings have been much depreciated. It is not in my power to restore them." And he prayed for a son to help him in preaching. When, on February 6, 1874, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati was born to Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Jagannath Puri, the Vaishnavas considered him the answer to his father's prayers. He was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck and wrapped across his chest like the sacred thread worn by Brahmanas. His parents gave him the name Bimala Prasad. When Bimala Prasad was 6 months old, the carts of the Jagannath festival stopped at the gate of Bhakti Vinoda's residence, and for 3 days could not be moved. Bhakti Vinoda Thakura's wife brought the infant onto the cart and approached the deity of Lord Jagannath. Spontaneously, the infant extended his arms and touched the feet of Lord Jagannath and was immediately blessed with a garland that fell from the body of the Lord. When Bhaktivinoda Thakur learned that the Lord's garland had fallen onto his son, he realized that this was the son for whom he had prayed. One day, when Bimala Prasad was still a child of no more than 4 years, his father mildly rebuked him for eating a mango not yet duly offered to Lord Krishna. Bimala Prasada, although only a child, considered himself an offender to the Lord and vowed never to eat mangoes again. This was a vow that he would follow throughout his life. By the time Bimala Prasada was 7 years old, he had memorized the entire Bhagavad Gita and could even explain its verses. His father then began training him in proofreading and printing. In conjunction with the publishing of the Vaishnava magazine, Sajjana Tosani, with his father, he visited many holy places and heard discourses from the learned Panditas. As a student, Bimala Prasada preferred to read the books written by his father instead of the school text. By the time he was 25, he had become well versed in Sanskrit, mathematics, and astronomy, and he has established himself the author and publisher of many magazines articles and one book, Surya Siddhanta, for which he received the epithet Siddhanta Saraswati in recognition of his erudition. When he was 26, his father guided him to take initiation from a renounced Vaishnava saint, Gaurkishora Das Babaji, who has advised him to preach the absolute truth and keep aside all other works. Receiving the blessings of Gaurkishora Das Babaji, Bimala Prasad, now Siddhanta Saraswati, resolved to dedicate his body, mind, ways to the service of Lord Krishna. In 1905, Siddhanta Saraswati took a vow to chant the Hare Krishna mantra 1,000,000,000 times, residing in Mayapur in a grass but near the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. He chanted the Hare Krishna mantra day and night. He cooked rice once a day in an earthen pot and ate nothing more. He slept on the ground, and when the rainwater leaked through the grass ceiling, he sat beneath an umbrella chanting. In 1911, while his aging father was lying ill, Siddhanta Saraswati took up a challenge against pseudo Vaishnavas who claimed that with their caste was prerequisite for preaching Krishna consciousness. The caste-conscious Brahman community had become incensed by Bhaktivinoda Thakur's presentation of many scriptural proofs that anyone, regardless of birth, could become a Brahman Vaishnava. These smarta Brahmanas, out to prove the inferiority of the Vaishnavas, arranged a discussion. On behalf of his indisposed father, young Siddhanta Saraswati wrote an essay, The Conclusive Difference Between the Brahmana and the Vaishnava, and submitted it before his father. Despite his poor health, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was elated to hear the arguments that would soundly defeat the challenge of the smarters. Siddhanta Saraswati then traveled to Midnapur, where Panditas from all over India had gathered for a 3-day discussion. Some of the smarta Panditas who spoke first claimed that anyone born in the Sudra family, even though initiated by a spiritual master, could never become purified and perform the Brahmanical duties of worshipping the deity or initiating disciples. Finally, Siddhanta Saraswati delivered his speech. He began quoting Vedic references glorifying the Brahmanas, and at this, the Smarita scholars became very much pleased. But when he began discussing the actual qualifications for becoming a Brahman, the qualities of a Vaishnavas, the relationship between the two, and who, according to the Vedic literature, is qualified to become a spiritual master and initiate disciples, then the joy of Vaishnava haters disappeared. Siddhanta Saraswati conclusively proved from the scriptures that if one is born as a Sudra but exhibits the qualities of a Brahman, then he should be honored as a Brahman despite his birth. And if one is born in a Brahman family but acts like a Sudra, then he is not a Brahman. After his speech, Siddhanta Saraswati was congratulated by the president of the conference, and thousands thronged around him. It was a victory for Vaishnavism. With the passing away of his father in 1914 and his spiritual master in 1915, Siddhanta Saraswati continued the mission of Lord Chaitanya. He assumed editorship of Sanjaya Tosani and established the Bhagavad Press in Krishnanagar. Then in 1918, in Mayapur, he sat down before a picture of Gorakishora Das Babaji and initiated himself into the sannyasi order. At this time, he assumed the sannyasi title Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was dedicated to using the printing press as the best medium for large-scale distribution of Krishna consciousness. He thought of the printing press as a Brihat Mridanga, a big Mridanga. Although the Mridanga drum had traditionally been used to accompany Kirtan even during the time of Lord Chaitanya, and although Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati himself led Kirtan parties and sent groups of devotees chanting in the streets and praying on the Mridangas, such Kirtans could be heard only for a block or two. But with the Brihat Mridanga, the big Mridanga drum of the printing press, the message of Lord Chaitanya could be spread all over the world. Most of the literature Abbey began reading had been printed on the Bhagavad Press, which Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati established in 1915. The Bhagavad Press had printed the Chaitanya Charitamrita with commentary by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the Bhagavad Gita with commentary by Vishwanatha Chakravarti, and one after another, the works of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. This literature was a spiritual heritage coming from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who had appeared almost 500 years before. Abbey had been a devotee of Lord Chaitanya since childhood, and he was familiar with the life of Lord Chaitanya through the well-known scriptures, Chaitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavat. He had learned of Lord Chaitanya not only as the most ecstatic form of a pure devotee who had spread the chanting of the holy name to all parts of India, but also as a direct appearance of Sri Krishna himself in the form of Radha and Krishna combined. But now, for the first time, Abbey was in touch with the great wealth of literature compiled by the Lord's immediate associates and followers, passed down in disciplic succession, and expanded on by great authorities. Lord Chaitanya's immediate followers, Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Sanatana Goswami, Srila Shiva Goswami, and others, had compiled many volumes based on the Vedic scriptures, and proving conclusively that Lord Chaitanya's teachings were the essence of Vedic wisdom. There were many books not yet published, but Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was intent on establishing many presses, just to release the sound of the Brihat Mridanga for the benefit of all people. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was teaching the conclusion of Lord Chaitanya's teachings that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that the chanting of his holy name should be stressed above all other religious practices. In former ages, other methods of attaining to God had been available, but in the present age of Kali, only the chanting of Hare Krishna will be effective. On the authority of the scriptures, such as Brihan Naradiya Purana and the Upanishads, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had specifically cited the Mahamantra Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Lord Krishna himself had confirmed in Bhagavad Gita that the only method of attaining him was devotional service. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. Abe knew these verses, he knew the chanting, and he knew the conclusions of the guitar. But now, as he eagerly read the writings of the great acharyas, he had fresh realizations of the scope of Lord Chaitanya's mission. Now he was discovering the depths of his own Vaishnava heritage and its efficacy for bringing about the highest welfare for people in the age destined to be full of troubles. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was often traveling and Abe was busy with his family and business. So to arrange another meeting was not possible. Yet from their first encounter, Abe had considered Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati his spiritual master, and Abe began thinking of him always. I have met such a nice saintly person. Whenever possible, Abe will seek out Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples, the members of Gaudiya Math. As for Gandhi's movement, Gandhi had suffered a bitter setback when his non-violent followers had plundered and committed violence during a protest. The British had taken the opportunity to arrest Gandhi and sentence him to 6 years in jail. Although his followers still revered him, the nationalist movement had lost much of its impetus. But regardless of that, Abe was no longer interested. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had defeated his idea that the nationalist cause was India's first priority. He had invoked Abe's original Krishna consciousness, and Abe now felt confident that Bhaktisiddhanta's mission was the real priority. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had invited him to preach, and from that moment Abe had wanted to join the Gaudiya Math as one of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's disciples. But now, instead of his political inclinations, it was his family obligations that stood in the way. He was no longer thinking, first let us become an independent nation, then preach about Lord Chaitanya. Now he was thinking, I cannot take part like the others. I have my family responsibilities. And the family was growing. In 1921, Abe and his wife had their first child, a son, and there would be more children and more income would be needed. Any money meant sacrificing time and energy, and it meant at least externally being distracted from the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Indian culture had been Indian culture had the highest regard for the family institution, and divorce was unheard of. Even if a man was in great financial difficulty, he would remain with his wife and children. Although Abe expressed regret at not being a sannyasi disciple in the Gaudiya Math, he never seriously considered leaving his young wife so early in their marriage. Guru Mohan was pleased to hear of his son's attraction to a Vaishnava guru, but he never expected Abe to abandon responsibilities and enter the renounced order. A Vaishnava could remain with wife and family, practice spiritual life at home, and even become active in preaching. Abe would have to find ways to serve the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati as a family man. Abe thought that if he were to become very successful in business, then he could spend money not only to support his family, but also to help support Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's mission of spreading Krishna consciousness. An astrologer had even predicted that Abe will become one of the wealthiest men in India, but with his present income, he could do little more than provide for his family's needs. He thought he might do better by trying to develop a business on his own. Abe expressed his feelings to Dr. Bose, who listened like a sympathetic father and suggested that Abe become his agent for all of northern India. Abe could purchase medicines, liniments, rectified spirits, toothpaste, and other items wholesale from Dr. Bose's factory, and travel widely throughout northern India, building up his own business. Also, Abe had enough experience with Bose's laboratory that he could try to make and market some of his own medicine and product. Dr. Bose and Abe decided that the centrally located city of Allahabad would be a good place for Abe to make his headquarters. In 1923, Abe and his wife and child moved to Allahabad, a 12-hour train ride northwest from Calcutta. The British had once made Allahabad the capital of the United Province, and they had built many good buildings there, including buildings for a high court and a university. Europeans and affluent Indian families like the Nehras lived in the modern, paved, well-lit section of town. There was also another older section with ancient narrow streets closely lined with buildings and shops. Many Bengalis resided there, and it was there that Abe decided to settle his family. He had chosen Allahabad, traditionally known as Prayaga, as a good location for business, but it was also one of India's most famous places of pilgrimage. Situated at the confluence of the three holiest rivers of India, the Ganges, the Yamuna, and the Saraswati, Allahabad was the site of two of India's most widely attended spiritual events, the annual Magha Mela and the Kumbh Mela, which took place every 12 years. And in search of spiritual purification, millions of pilgrims from all over India would converge here each year at the time of the full moon in the month of Magha, January, and bathe at the junction of the three sacred rivers. Abe's home at 60 Badshahi Mundi consisted of a few rented homes. For his business, he rented a small shop in the commercial center of the city at Johnston Gong Road, where he opened his dispensary, Prayag Pharmacy, and began selling medicines, tinctures, syrups, and other products manufactured by Bose Laboratory. He met an Allahabad physician, Dr. Ghosh, who was interested in a business partnership, so Abe asked him to become his attending physician and move his office to Prayag Pharmacy. Dr. Ghosh consented and closed his own shop, Tropical Pharmacy. At Prayag Pharmacy, Dr. Ghosh will diagnose patients and give medical prescriptions, which Abe will fill. Dr. Ghosh will then receive a 25% commission from the sale of the prescriptions. Abe and Dr. Ghosh became friends. They would visit at each other's house, and they treated each other's children like their own family members. Often they discussed their aspirations for increasing profits. Dr. Ghosh, Abe was a business-minded man. We were all God-fearing, of course. In every home we have a small temple, and we must have deities. But he used to always talk about business and how to meet family expenses. Although at home Abe wore a coat and dhoti, sometimes for business he would dress in shirt pants. He was a good-looking, full-mustached, energetic young man in his late 20s. He and Radharani Dey now had two children. A daughter was born after they had been in Allahabad 1 year. Go Mohan, who was now 75, had come to live with him, as had Abe's widowed sister, Rajeshwari, and her son, Tulasi. Go Mohan mostly stayed at home, chanted on his beads, and worshipped the Salakram, Srila, deity of Krishna. He was satisfied that Abe was doing right, and Abe was satisfied to have his father living comfortably with him and freely worshipping Krishna. Abe led a busy life. He was intent on building his business. By 800 a.m., he would go to his pharmacy, where he would meet Dr. Ghosh and begin his day's work. At noon he would come home, then he would return to the pharmacy in the late afternoon. He had purchased a large wig for 8,000 rupees and thought And although he never drove it himself, he let his nephew, a good driver, use it for his taxi business. Occasionally, Abe will use the car on his own business excursions, and his nephew will then act as his chauffeur. It so happened that both Motilal Nehru and his son Jawaharlal were customers at Prayag Pharmacy. Because Jawaharlal would always order Western medicines, Abe thought he must have felt that Indian ways were inferior. Once Jawaharlal approached Abe for a political contribution, and Abe donated, being a conscientious merchant. During the day, Abe will talk with his customers and other friends who would stop by, and they will tell him many things. A former military officer used to tell Abe stories of World War One. He told how Marshal Foch in France had one day ordered the killing of thousands of Belgian refugees whose maintenance had become a burden to him on the battlefield. A Mohammedan gentleman, a member of a royal family in Afghanistan, would come daily with his son to sit and chat. Abe would listen to his visitors and converse pleasantly and make up their prescriptions. But his thoughts kept returning to his meeting with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He went over it again and again in his mind, how he had looked, his mannerism, he had, how he had looked, his mannerisms, what he had said. At night, Abe will go home to his wife and children. Radharani was a chaste and faithful wife who spent her days cooking, cleaning, and caring for her own children. But she was not inclined to share her husband's interest in things spiritual. He could not convey to her his feelings about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Abe's wife, their two children, Goa Mohan, Abe's younger brother, and Krishna Charan, Abe's widowed sister, Rajeshwari, and her son, Tulasidas, all went together to an Allahabad studio for a family portrait. The photo shows Abe in his late 20s. He is thin and dark, with a full mustache. His forehead is broad, his eyes dark and clear. He wears a white kurta and dhoti and plain dark slippers. He sits in a chair, his wife standing behind him, an attractive young woman in a white khadi sari with a line of color on the border. A slim arm rests behind Abe's head on the back of his chair, a small hand gripping the edge of the chair. Her left hand hangs by her side, gripped in a fist. She is barefoot. With his left hand, Abe steadies his 2-year-old boy, Pacha Pragaraj, a glaring infant on his lap, the boy seeming to squirm, his baby legs and bare feet dangling by his mother's knee. Abe seems a bit amused by the son on his lap. Abe is a handsome Indian man, his wife an attractive woman, both young. Also behind Abe stands his nephew Tulasi and his brother Krishna Charan. Sitting on the far right is Abe's sister Rajeshwari, dressed in a widow's white sari, holding Sulakshama, Abe's daughter, on her lap. Sulakshman is also squirming, her foot rooting towards the photographer. In the center sits Go Mohan. His face is shriveled and his whole body is emaciated with age. He is also wearing a white kurta and a dhoti. His hands seem to be moving actively on his lap, perhaps with palsy. He is short and small and old. Abe traveled frequently throughout northern India. intent on expanding his sales. It was not unusual for him to be gone a few days in the week, and sometimes a week or more at a time as he traveled from one city to another. The pharmaceutical industry was just beginning in India, and doctors, hospitals, and pharmacies were eager to buy from the competent, gentlemanly agent who called on them from Bose's laboratory of Calcutta. He would travel by train and stay in hotels. He liked the feeling of freedom from home that traveling afforded, but the real drive was servicing accounts and getting new ones. That was his business. Riding in the third class unreserved compartment was often uncomfortable. The only seats were benches, which were often dirty, and passengers were permitted to crowd on without reservations. But that is how Abe traveled, hundreds of miles every week. As the train moved between towns, you will see the numberless small village and then the country land that spread out before him on either side of the tracks. At every stop, he would hear the cries of the tea vendors as they walked alongside the train windows. Chai, chai, tea. The British had introduced it, and now millions of Indians were convinced that they could not get through the morning without their little glass of hot tea. As a strict Vaishnava, Abe never touched it, but his wife, much to his displeasure, was becoming a regular tea drinker. Although Abe was accustomed to dressing as a European businessman, he never compromised his strict Vaishnava principles. Most of his fellow Bengalis had taken up fish eating, but Abe was always careful to avoid non-Vaishnava foods, even at hotels. Once at a vegetarian hotel, the Empire Hindu Hotel in Bombay, he was served onions, and sometimes hotel people tried to serve him mushrooms, garlic, and even eggs. But all of this he carefully avoided, keeping a small semblance of his home routine. He would take his bath early in the morning with cold water. He followed his routine year round, and when in Saharanpur he did so during the bitter cold weather. The hot keeper was greatly surprised. Abe conversed with many people in his travels. A doctor in Dhaka told him that on his way to the office he had passed a farmer talking to a friend and could tell by the sound of the farmer's cough that the farmer will die within a few hours. Another doctor told Abe that he had just come from seeing a pneumonia patient who was defying nature and medical science by continuing to live. He met a Mohammedan doctor in Gaya who lamented that he had just lost a patient, although he had given the man the very best medicine. Such accounts from men of the medical profession confirmed Abe's conviction that without God's sanction, no one could be saved. No that ever thought of his medical sales as philanthropic work. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had already convinced him that the only way to save a person was by giving him Krishna consciousness. Abe's medical products were strictly for business. On one business trip, it was in 1925, he traveled through Agra, only 40 miles south of Vrindavan, taking the opportunity, he made his first visit to Holy Vrindavan, fulfilling his childhood aspiration. He loved the sight of Vrindavan, but he could spend only a day or two. Even a single day away from his sales work could be critical. As a reverent pilgrim, Abe visited a few temples, especially the principal temples established by the followers of Lord Chaitanya, but he had to move on.